there is a silent force within you, a force that shapes your reality, your decisions, your emotions, and ultimately, your life. Most people move through life believing they are in control. But if you observe closely, you will notice something different. Their mood changes without permission. Their focus shifts without intention. Their decisions are often reactions, not choices. This happens because they have unknowingly given authority to something that was never meant to lead. Their own mind. The mind is powerful, but power without direction becomes chaos. It produces thoughts constantly, like a machine that never turns off. Some thoughts are useful, clear, and constructive. Others are filled with doubt, fear, comparison, and negativity. The problem is not that these thoughts appear. The problem is that most people accept every thought as truth the moment a thought enters. They identify with it. They do not question it. They do not step back from it. They become it. When the mind says, "You are not good enough," they feel small. When it says, "Something will go wrong," they feel anxious. When it replays the past, they feel regret. When it imagines the future, they feel fear. In this state, a person is no longer directing their life. They are being directed by a stream of uncontrolled mental activity. This is what it means for the mind to become the master. A master gives commands and the servant follows. In the same way, when the mind is in control, every thought becomes an order. And without awareness, you obey automatically. You react instead of respond. You speak without thinking. You act without clarity. You are pulled in different directions, not by reality, but by the noise inside your head. But the mind was never designed to hold this position of authority. It is not meant to decide who you are. It is not meant to define your worth. It is not meant to control your actions without question. It is a tool, nothing more, nothing less. A tool can build or destroy, depending on how it is used. A sharp blade in the hands of a skilled person creates precision and beauty. The same blade in careless hands causes harm. Your mind works in the same way. When it is guided with discipline, it becomes a source of clarity, focus, and strength. When it is left unattended, it becomes restless, reactive, and destructive. The shift begins when you stop treating every thought as a command and start seeing it as a suggestion. A thought is just a mental event. It appears, stays for a moment, and disappears. It has no power on its own. Its power comes from your attention and your belief. The moment you believe a thought without questioning it, you give it control. The moment you step back and observe it, you take that control back. This is where mastery begins. Not by silencing the mind completely, but by changing your relationship with it. Instead of being inside every thought, you begin to stand behind it. You watch it rise and fall without immediately reacting. You create a gap between stimulus and response. In that gap, something powerful happens. You are no longer forced to follow every impulse. You gain the ability to choose. You decide which thoughts deserve your attention and which ones should pass. You begin to guide your mind instead of being guided by it. And slowly, with practice, the roles start to reverse. The mind becomes quieter, more focused, more obedient. Not because it has been suppressed, but because it has been trained. It starts working for you, not against you. It becomes a tool that supports your growth rather than a force that limits it. This is the difference between living unconsciously and living with intention. One is driven by uncontrolled thought patterns. The other is directed by awareness. One is chaotic, the other is disciplined. And the moment you realize this difference, you begin to see that control was never outside of you. It was always within, waiting to be claimed. Most people try to control their lives by changing what is happening around them. They adjust their environment, their relationships, their routines, hoping that these external changes will bring clarity and peace. But no matter how much they rearrange the outside world, the same patterns continue to appear within. The same stress, the same overthinking, the same emotional reactions. This happens because the root is not outside. It is within, and the doorway to that inner world is awareness. Awareness is the ability to see what is happening inside you without immediately reacting to it. It sounds simple, but it requires a level of attention that most people never develop. Instead of observing their thoughts, they become lost in them. Instead of noticing their emotions, they are consumed by them. They do not realize when a thought begins, when it changes, or when it fades. Everything happens automatically below the surface of conscious attention. Without awareness, the mind operates like a loop. A single negative thought can trigger a chain reaction. One small doubt becomes a story. That story becomes a belief. That belief shapes behavior. And before a person realizes it, they are living inside a pattern they never consciously chose. It feels real, it feels true, but it is simply the result of unconscious repetition. The moment awareness enters, this cycle is interrupted. When you become aware, you begin to notice the exact moment a thought appears. You see how quickly it tries to pull your attention. You notice how it connects to other thoughts, forming a narrative. Instead of being inside the story, you are now watching it unfold. This shift may seem small, but it changes everything, because what you can see clearly, you are no longer controlled by in the same way. Awareness creates space. And in that space, there is choice. Without awareness, reaction is instant. Someone says something and you respond without thinking. A situation changes and your mood shifts automatically. A memory appears and you are pulled into the past. There is no pause, no separation, no control. But with awareness, there is a gap, a moment where you can see what is happening before you act. In that moment, you are no longer a prisoner of impulse. You begin to recognize patterns that were once invisible. You notice how certain situations always trigger the same response. You see how your mind repeats familiar thoughts, even when they are not helpful. You observe how emotions rise, peak, and eventually pass, even without your interference. This observation weakens their grip, not by force, but by understanding. Awareness does not fight the mind. It reveals it. And when something is revealed clearly, it loses its hidden power. A fear that is seen directly is no longer as overwhelming. A negative thought that is observed loses its authority. You begin to realize that not everything your mind produces deserves your attention. Some thoughts are just habits. Some emotions are just temporary waves. They do not define you unless you attach to them. This is where control begins. Not through suppression, but through clarity. As awareness deepens, your relationship with your inner world changes. You stop trying to eliminate every negative thought, and instead, you focus on seeing them as they are. You stop identifying with every emotion, and instead, you allow them to move through you. There is less resistance, less struggle, and more understanding. Over time, this practice strengthens your ability to remain present. You are less distracted by unnecessary thinking. You are less reactive to external situations. You become more grounded, more stable, more intentional. Your actions begin to come from clarity rather than confusion. This is the quiet power of awareness. It does not demand attention, yet it transforms everything it touches. It brings light to what was once automatic. It gives you access to a deeper level of control, not by forcing change, but by making unconscious patterns visible. And once you can truly see what is happening within you, you are no longer moving through life blindly. You are awake within your own experience, able to direct your thoughts, your responses, and your energy with precision instead of habit. From the moment you wake up, thoughts begin to appear. Some are quiet and subtle, others are loud and persistent. They comment on everything: what you should do, what you should have done, what might happen next. Over time, without realizing it, you begin to believe that these thoughts are you. Their voice becomes your identity. Their judgments feel like truth. Their presence feels permanent. But this is where confusion begins. A thought is something that appears within you, not something that defines you. It comes and goes, constantly changing, constantly shifting. If you watch closely, you will see that no single thought stays for long. One replaces another, and then another follows. If your thoughts are always changing, how can they be who you are? Yet most people never question this. When a negative thought appears, they immediately attach to it. If the mind says, "You are not capable," they feel limited. If it says, "You will fail," they feel fear. If it says, "You are not enough," they carry that weight as if it is a fact. They do not pause to examine it. They do not step back to observe it. They accept it, and in doing so, they become it. This is how identity is unconsciously shaped, not by truth, but by repetition. The mind repeats certain patterns so often that they begin to feel familiar, and what is familiar starts to feel real. But familiarity is not the same as truth. A thought can be repeated 1,000 times and still not define who you are. It only gains power when you stop questioning it. To see this clearly, you must begin to separate yourself from what you observe. If you can notice a thought, it means you are not the thought. The observer and the observed cannot be the same. There is a part of you that is aware of what is happening in your mind. That part is silent, steady, and unchanged, even when everything else is moving. Thoughts may come and go, emotions may rise and fall, but this awareness remains. When you shift your attention to this awareness, something changes. You are no longer inside every thought. You are watching it from a distance. You see it appear. You see it try to pull your attention, and you see it fade when it is not fed. This creates a sense of space, space between you and the mental noise that once controlled you. In that space, there is freedom. You begin to realize that a thought does not need to be followed. It does not need to be believed. It does not need to control your actions. It is simply an event happening in the mind. Just because a thought says something does not make it true. Just because it feels strong does not mean it is right. This understanding weakens the automatic connection between thought and reaction. Before, a single thought could change your entire mood. Now, it becomes something you can observe without immediately responding. You start to question it. You ask, is this useful? Is this accurate? Is this necessary? And often, you will find that many thoughts do not meet these conditions. They are just echoes of past experiences, fears, or habits. As this awareness deepens, your sense of identity begins to shift. You no longer define yourself by what your mind produces. You are not the doubt, not the fear, not the constant commentary. You are the one who sees it all. This brings a sense of stability, because awareness does not fluctuate the way thoughts do. Even in moments of stress or uncertainty, this understanding remains available. You may still experience negative thoughts, but they no longer have the same authority. They pass through without taking control. You remain grounded, not because the mind is silent, but because you are no longer lost inside it. This is the quiet realization that changes everything. The mind continues to function, to think, to analyze, but it no longer defines your reality in the same way. You begin to live with more clarity, more intention, and less internal conflict. And slowly, through consistent observation, the grip of unnecessary thinking begins to loosen, not because you forced it away, but because you stopped identifying with it. Most people misunderstand positivity. They think it means always feeling good, always smiling, always avoiding anything that feels uncomfortable or difficult. They treat it like a surface level emotion, something that comes and goes depending on circumstances. When things are easy, they feel positive. When life becomes challenging, that positivity disappears, replaced by frustration, doubt, or negativity. This is not true positivity. This is dependency. When your state depends entirely on external conditions, you are not in control. You are reacting. You are allowing situations, people, and outcomes to decide how you feel. In this state, positivity becomes fragile. It cannot withstand pressure because it was never built on discipline. It was built on convenience. Real positivity is different. It is not something you wait for. It is something you practice. It is the ability to choose your response, even when your mind offers you a different one. It is the strength to remain steady when everything around you is unstable. It is not about denying reality or pretending that everything is perfect. It is about facing reality clearly, without allowing it to control your inner state. When something goes wrong, the mind reacts immediately. It creates stories, assigns blame, imagines worst-case scenarios. This happens automatically. You do not choose the first reaction. It appears on its own, shaped by past experiences and habits. But what happens next? That is where discipline begins. You have a choice. You can follow the reaction, or you can observe it. Without discipline, most people follow it without question. A small problem becomes a larger one because the mind keeps feeding it. One negative thought attracts another, and soon the situation feels overwhelming, not because of what actually happened, but because of how it was processed internally. With discipline, something shifts. You still notice the reaction, but you do not immediately act on it. You pause. You allow the initial wave to pass without adding to it. This pause may be brief, but it creates space. And in that space, you regain control. Positivity, in this sense, is not about forcing yourself to feel happy. It is about choosing clarity over distortion. It is about refusing to let the mind exaggerate what is happening. It is about responding in a way that is grounded rather than impulsive. This requires consistent effort. The mind has been conditioned over time to react in certain ways. It will not change instantly. It will return to old patterns, especially in moments of stress. But every time you choose awareness over reaction, you weaken those patterns. You begin to build a different response. Over time, this becomes your new habit. You start to notice that situations that once triggered, strong emotional reactions no longer affect you in the same way. Not because the situations have changed, but because your response has. You are no longer amplifying the problem with unnecessary thinking. You are seeing things more directly, more simply. This is where positivity becomes stable. It is no longer dependent on everything going your way. It is grounded in your ability to remain balanced, regardless of what happens. You do not ignore challenges, but you do not allow them to disturb your inner state more than necessary. You deal with them with focus and clarity, not with emotional chaos. This form of positivity is quiet. It does not need to be displayed or announced. It is reflected in your actions, in your decisions, in the way you carry yourself. It is present when you remain calm under pressure, when you choose patience instead of frustration, when you respond thoughtfully instead of reacting impulsively. It is built through repetition. Every moment offers a choice: to react or to respond, to follow the mind or to guide it, to feed negativity or to step back from it. These small decisions, made consistently, shape your internal state over time. And as this discipline strengthens, you begin to trust yourself more. Not because life becomes easier, but because you know you can handle it without losing control. Your mind still produces thoughts, still reacts, but it no longer dictates your behavior. This is the foundation of real positivity. Not a temporary feeling, but a trained way of being. The mind is constantly being shaped, whether you are aware of it or not. Every thought you entertain, every emotion you reinforce, every piece of information you consume, these are all forms of input. And over time, this input becomes conditioning. It creates patterns, habits, and tendencies that begin to operate automatically. This is why what you repeatedly expose your mind to has such a powerful influence on how you think, feel, and act. Most people underestimate this process. They believe their thoughts are random or that their mindset is fixed. But the truth is, the mind is highly adaptable. It learns from repetition. It strengthens what is used frequently and weakens what is ignored. Just like a muscle, it develops based on how it is trained. If you constantly focus on problems, your mind becomes skilled at finding problems. If you repeatedly engage in negative thinking, your mind becomes more efficient at producing it. It starts to look for confirmation, filtering your experiences in a way that supports those patterns. Even neutral situations can begin to appear negative simply because that is the lens the mind has been conditioned to use. This does not happen suddenly. It builds gradually through small, consistent reinforcements. A negative thought appears, and instead of questioning it, you follow it. It connects to another thought, and then another, forming a chain. The longer you stay engaged, the stronger the pattern becomes. Over time, this pattern becomes automatic. It no longer feels like something you are doing. It feels like something that is happening to you. But the same principle works in the opposite direction. If you begin to feed your mind with awareness, clarity, and intentional thinking, new patterns start to form. At first, this may feel unnatural. The mind will resist unfamiliar ways of thinking. It will try to return to what it knows, even if those patterns are not helpful. This resistance is part of the process. It does not mean change is not happening. It means the mind is adjusting. Consistency is what determines the outcome. One moment of awareness will not transform the mind, but repeated moments will. Each time you choose not to engage with a negative thought, you weaken its influence. Each time you redirect your attention to something more constructive, you strengthen a different pathway. Over time, these small shifts begin to accumulate. You start to notice that certain thoughts no longer appear as frequently. Situations that once triggered strong reactions begin to feel more manageable. Your mind becomes less cluttered, less reactive, more focused. This is not because you forced the mind to change, but because you trained it through repetition. What you consume also plays a significant role in this process. The information you take in through conversations, media, and environment becomes material for your thoughts. If your input is filled with negativity, distraction, or unnecessary noise, your mind will reflect that. It will become restless, scattered, and easily influenced. On the other hand, if you are intentional about what you allow into your mind, you create a different foundation. You begin to support clarity instead of confusion, focus instead of distraction. This does not mean avoiding reality, but it means choosing what is useful and letting go of what is not. Over time, the mind begins to align with what it is consistently exposed to. It becomes more stable, more disciplined, more supportive of your intentions. You are no longer working against your own thinking. Instead, your thoughts begin to move in a direction that serves you. This is why awareness alone is not enough. Awareness shows you the patterns, but what you choose to reinforce determines whether those patterns continue or change. You cannot control every thought that appears, but you can control which ones you give your energy to. And energy is what allows a thought to grow. When you repeatedly give attention to something, it becomes stronger, more familiar, more dominant. When you withdraw attention, it begins to fade. This is a subtle process, but it is always happening, shaping your internal world in the background. As you become more conscious of this, you begin to take responsibility for what you are feeding your mind, not in a forceful or restrictive way, but with clarity. You recognize that every moment of attention is an investment, and over time, those investments determine the structure of your thinking, the quality of your mindset, and the direction of your life. Most people spend their lives trying to control what is outside of them. They try to manage situations, influence people, predict outcomes, and avoid uncertainty. They believe that if they can just arrange everything in the right way, they will finally feel calm, stable, and in control. But no matter how much effort they put into this, something always remains unpredictable. Something always shifts. And when it does, their sense of control disappears with it. This happens because their stability was never truly their own. It was borrowed from external conditions. When your inner state depends on what is happening around you, it will always be unstable. The world is constantly changing. People act in ways you cannot control. Situations evolve without warning. Outcomes do not always match expectations. If your peace relies on these things being a certain way, it will always be temporary. This is why inner mastery is essential. Inner mastery is not about controlling the world. It is about understanding and directing what is happening within you. It is the ability to remain steady, regardless of external movement. It does not mean you become passive or indifferent. It means you are no longer easily shaken by what you cannot control. Without this mastery, every external event has the power to disturb you. A small inconvenience can create frustration. A delay can create impatience. a disagreement can create anger. These reactions may seem natural, but they are often exaggerated by the mind. The situation itself is not always the problem. It is the way it is processed internally. When you develop control over your mind, this begins to change. You still experience the same situations, but your response becomes different. You no longer react immediately. You observe first. You allow the initial impulse to settle before deciding how to respond. This creates a sense of stability that does not depend on the situation itself. Over time, this stability becomes consistent. You begin to notice that things which once disturbed you no longer have the same effect, not because they have become easier, but because your inner foundation has become stronger. You are not carried away by every thought or emotion. You remain grounded even when circumstances are not ideal. This is where true freedom begins. Freedom is often misunderstood as the ability to do whatever you want, whenever you want. But if your actions are driven by impulse, by emotion, or by unconscious patterns, that is not freedom. That is reaction. True freedom is the ability to choose your response consciously without being controlled by internal or external forces. When you have this ability, you are no longer dependent on everything going your way. You can face challenges without losing clarity. You can experience discomfort without becoming overwhelmed. You can navigate uncertainty without constant fear. This does not remove difficulty from life, but it changes how you relate to it. Instead of resisting everything that feels uncomfortable, you begin to accept that change is part of the process. You stop expecting the world to remain stable, and instead, you build stability within yourself. This shift reduces unnecessary struggle. You are no longer fighting against reality. You are working with it from a place of clarity. As this continues, your focus also begins to change. You invest less energy in trying to control outcomes and more energy in refining your own responses. You become more intentional with your thoughts, your actions, and your attention. This leads to better decisions, not because you control everything, but because you are no longer clouded by unnecessary mental noise. The mind becomes an ally rather than an obstacle. It supports your direction instead of pulling you away from it. It becomes more disciplined, more focused, more aligned with your intentions. This creates a sense of confidence that is not based on external success, but on internal control. And when you reach this point, you realize something important. The world has not changed in a significant way. Challenges still exist. Uncertainty is still present. But your experience of it is completely different, because now, instead of being controlled by everything around you, you are grounded within yourself. And in that realization, something quiet but powerful settles in. You stop chasing a version of life where nothing goes wrong, because you finally understand that such a life was never the goal. You stop building your peace on conditions that were never meant to stay permanent. Instead, you begin to stand in a place that does not shift with circumstances. Not because life becomes easier, but because you become clearer. There is no longer a need to fight every thought, no need to win every internal argument, no need to control every outcome before it unfolds. You learn to move with life instead of against it. You respond instead of react. You observe instead of absorb. And slowly, the noise that once felt like your identity begins to lose its authority. What remains is presence, a steady awareness that does not depend on approval, success, or control. A state where you can face uncertainty without collapsing into fear, where you can experience difficulty without losing yourself in it, where you can move through change without losing your center. This is not an escape from life. It is a deeper entry into it. Because when the mind is no longer in charge of every reaction, something more intelligent emerges. Clarity. When emotional turbulence is no longer leading every decision, something more grounded appears. Wisdom. And when inner noise is no longer dominating attention, something more powerful becomes available. Awareness. In this space, even silence feels different. Not empty, but full. Not absent, but alive. And you begin to realize that mastery was never about controlling everything outside of you. It was about no longer being controlled from within. Nothing more, nothing less.